Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
Started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once Congress finishes watching Age of Disclosure.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely, but even if it's new science and not aliens, whew.
It's a very exciting time. Oh, buddy, I'm so
Hey,
excited to talk to you.
yeah, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I had
Been
a
a
great
while.
break over Thanksgiving, and I finally managed to make time to sit down and watch the big documentary, the one everyone's
Yeah.
been waiting for, Age of Disclosure.
Oh, does it
Yeah,
does it have that like voice actor in the beginning? In the
it
age of
doesn't, but
disclosure.
it
Okay, yeah,
should.
it should.
Sidebar, uh, greatest video ever made. Look up the trailer for Jerry Seinfeld's movie Comedian. It's just the voiceover guy in the booth, and he's like, in a world, and the guy interrupts him. He's like, it's not that kind of movie. Oh, uh, in a time. No. And it just like keeps getting worse and worse. It's so
Yeah.
good.
Wait, wasn't there another? There was another movie that played on that meme with a female voiceover artist who was supposed to be the
Mhm.
daughter of that guy. Um,
Yeah, Lake Bell. I think it was a TV series or a
oh,
movie.
okay.
Yeah, I didn't watch
Yeah,
it, but I know
It's,
the one you're talking about.
it was very good.
Anyway, we derailed very
Yeah,
quickly.
it's gonna be great.
It's gonna be great. So yeah, Age of Disclosure. This documentary has been on my radar for a while. As I recall, the earliest we heard about it was an interview with Lou Elizondo, maybe 3 years ago,
Wait,
where
so
he said,
this isn't the thing that came out like 2 weeks ago,
"It
or is it?
is."
Oh, okay,
They've
okay,
been
all right,
working on it for a while.
okay, cool.
Um, so Elizondo was like, "Hey, like I just finished working on this documentary. It's going to be a total game changer when it comes out." But he didn't say what it was,
Mm,
and it didn't come out. Everyone was
mm,
kind of waiting and waiting. And then eventually we found out it was this thing called Age of Disclosure. It was an official selection at South by Southwest either a year or 2 years ago. Um, it has finally been released. Um, the director, Dan Farah, produced it completely independently, which on the one hand meant there was no one to tell him how to make the movie or get
mm.
in his way or force him to change the tone. On the other hand, it meant once the documentary was done, he didn't have a distribution deal. So
Oh,
he now has to figure out how to get in front of people.
right, yeah.
Eventually, he made a deal with Prime Video. It is
Oh,
currently the top documentary on Prime Video.
I bet.
I don't
Yeah.
know how competitive that category is, but still, it's pretty
Documentaries
exciting.
on Prime is it's a hot topic.
Right. So I know everybody's excited to hear what I have to say. And obviously, hey, guess what? We're recording a whole podcast about it. But the TLDR, um, this documentary is a very good summary of the current state of UFO information. If you are deep in the weeds of the UFO world, like say you produce a UFO podcast, or maybe even
As an
just
example.
listen to a UFO podcast with some regularity, there may not be a ton of new information in it, but
Okay.
it is an excellent onboarding point
Cool.
if you have any tolerant friends in your life who may be a little UFO curious.
Mm.
If you can get them to dedicate 2 hours to the topic, this will do a great job of getting them up to speed with like the table stakes for the
So
topic as it exists today.
would this be a good like watching party style thing?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right.
It was very compelling. The largest criticism I have seen from it so far is people who don't believe in UFOs saying that he didn't include any skeptics. And like,
Hmm.
well, yeah, that's not the point of a documentary. Most documentaries don't include a lot of people arguing the opposite point of view of your documentary. That's
Right.
why you're making a documentary. You have a point of view.
Right.
So,
It's not presenting an argument. It's documenting facts about what they went
yeah.
through. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is presenting an argument, but the whole point, and this is something we have seen happen over and over again. The best UFO resources out there tend most compelling, I should say,
Okay.
tend to be here are people who are serious saying things about UFOs that you may find surprising
Yeah.
if you have been, like most people, taken in by the stigma surrounding the topic to the idea that anyone who believes in UFOs is some sort of Yahoo or maybe a little off their rocker. So when you hear repeated eyewitness reports from very credible military pilots, high-ranking military officials, members of the intelligence community, people with top secret clearances who are trusted to make critical decisions every day in our government, coming out and saying, yeah, there's compelling reason to believe this is true. I always find that very interesting.
Yeah.
Leslie Kane's book
Yeah.
is excellent about that. UFOs and Nukes is excellent about that. Um, some of the earlier UFO stuff that Lou Elizondo has been involved with takes that approach.
Right.
There's a downside, of course, because the people that most people find most compelling tend to be military.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
as
That
we
is a
have
challenge.
discussed before, the reason military people ever take this seriously is if there's a chance it's a threat. So
Right.
we do slide a little bit into the threat narrative,
And
and we'll come
we've got a
back
whole
to
thing
that. But
about that, right? Later. Cool.
yeah, exactly.
All right.
Um, so anyway, like I said, there's been a lot of hype about the movie, and that hype, I am pleased to report, has not died down since the release of the documentary, right? There's
Yeah.
always a
Nice.
chance that something's going to get really hyped up and then it comes out and everyone's like, whoa, actually, that was kind of a stinker. I've heard nothing but good things about it. I watched it myself. I quite enjoyed it. Um, Director Dan Farah has been making the rounds. He was on Joe Rogan. He was in a bunch of other places. In an interview recently, he said, there is no way to put the genie back in the bottle, as they say. I have been getting messages from senior senators and people that are involved in the administration all weekend saying basically, the doors have just been blown open and the government doesn't have any choice but to walk through it in some regard. He went on to say, I think it's only a matter of time before we see a sitting president step to the microphone and tell the world we are not alone in the universe, and that the US intends to lead the way in this new chapter for humanity. And I think that's going to happen as a result of this movie. The only question is when, and I don't think we're too far off from that point.
I mean, you got to set goals, right? But that does seem a little bit far fetched that a single documentary is going to like change the course of everything.
Yeah. Now, what I will say, because I agree with you, I think that's a little hyperbolic. Um, I think having a well put together media packet that just nicely summarizes
Oh
why
yeah.
you should take this topic seriously is incredibly valuable because our culture has been awash in UFO stigma since Project Blue Book ended. Like,
Right.
absolute ridiculing of the topic. If you believe in this, you're a crackpot conspiracy theorist. And since 2017, we found out that not only does the government not believe this is some crackpot fringe thing, they've been taking it very seriously behind closed doors. And that's really what this movie is about.
Mm.
Now, I do have one other quick
Yeah,
quote
yeah.
on the kind of hype train, which is if Dan Farah says this movie is going to change the world, but he's the director and he's selling his movie, and
Yeah,
maybe you
right.
kind of take that with a
Like
grain of salt. There is one other quote I have. Representative Nick Begich said, "Age of disclosure is totally making the rounds here in Congress. I know several members have watched it over the break. I watched it. It's very well done. What they did was they took years of testimony and condensed it down into a digestible format. I think they did a great job doing that because you got a lot of people on the record talking about what they know or what they suspect or what they've been told about this issue."
Yeah, interesting. Is he part of the UAP caucus, or I don't recognize the
He's
name?
not, I don't
Okay,
think.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, enough hype. Let's talk about the actual movie.
Yeah. Okay. So when I watch a documentary or a film or a big 3 hour interview or something like that, what I'm usually doing is sitting there with my phone open,
Hmm.
recording timestamps and quick notes about, like, hey, at this time he said this, so that later I can go back and pull relevant quotes out.
Sure.
I did that with this movie and very quickly abandoned that approach because I want to quote the entire freaking movie. So we're going to go a little loosey goosier here
Sure.
and kind of give you my impressions of it. But I do want to go through with some quotes of the opening of the movie. The first, like, 2 or 3 minutes of the
Mm.
movie do such a good job of setting the tone and tenor of what you're about to go through.
Hmm.
So, the very first thing you see is former Navy pilot Ryan Graves, who we've talked about on the show before,
Yes.
saying, "The objects have been detected everywhere Navy operations are conducted all across the world." And then followed by former Navy pilot David Fravor saying, "The technology that we faced was far superior to anything we have currently or that we're going to have in the next 20 years. I recognized the footage. It was from when they were both congressional witnesses
Okay.
appearing
Cool.
in front of Congress to talk about this. So,
Yeah.
very good. Representative Andre Carson pops up next. He says, "Unidentified aerial phenomena are a potential national security threat, and they need to be treated that way." Followed by Senator Chuck Schumer saying, "The U.S. government has gathered a great deal of information about UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with American people." Four quotes. And if you had to give someone a TLDR of the current state, boy, you couldn't do much better than those four sentences. This is a worldwide phenomenon observed everywhere the Navy is conducting operations. The technology is far superior to anything we have now. We're not talking, oh, this is like a next gen fighter. Like, this is completely out of class. Um, there's reason to regard it as a potential security threat, and the government knows about it and has kept it secret from the American people, but also from Congress, arguably the president, etc.
Yeah.
Um, then we get a title card that says, "Everyone interviewed in this film has direct knowledge of UAP as a result of their work for the US government. While some of their knowledge is classified, they are now breaking their silence with what they can lawfully disclose."
Yeah. I think you're right. That is a good. It's a good start. I don't know how. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what I would pick. What would be
It's
super
hard.
convincing to
Yeah.
me? But if you're gonna pick
Yeah.
four statements, those are great.
Yeah. And especially I think if you're coming at this from the perspective of, you are showing this to someone who, when they think UFOs, they think little green men and flying saucers and
Right.
Simpsons jokes and the X-Files theme. Literally just opening with Navy pilots talking about this being a common and worldwide problem.
Hmm.
That's pretty
That's
compelling.
interesting. Yeah.
Um, They then go into a rapid fire montage of
Okay.
almost everyone who appears in this movie just saying what their background is.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to tell you who the people were giving these quotes, but I'm going to go real fast because in the movie, they don't title card these people. They just show quick, 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 quick. What did they say? Um, Ryan Graves, "I spent 11 years in the U.S. Navy as a fighter pilot." David Fravor, "For 18 years, I flew fighters for the U.S. Navy." Chris Mellon, "I spent 20 years working in the U.S. intelligence community." James Clapper, "I served as the fourth director of national intelligence." Jim Semivan, I spent 25 years as a senior official with the CIA. Tim Gallaudet, I retired from the Navy as a one-star admiral after 32 years of service. Hal Puthoff, I worked on a highly classified UAP program for the government as a senior scientist. Carl Nell, I spent 32 years in and out of government in national security. Eric Davis, I worked 28 years as an astrophysicist on highly classified UAP programs for the US government and for the defense industry. Gary Nolan, I'm a professor in the Department of Pathology at Stanford University School of Medicine, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been working with the Department of Defense and people in the CIA on the UAP topic.
Ah, so, so those are, yeah, I like that style. Those are all pretty recognizable names, but I don't think we've talked about James Clapper or Jim Semivan.
Yeah, Jim Semivan is kind of in the background of a lot of the stuff we talked
Okay,
about. If you read um, Lou Elizondo's book, he's in there. But
okay,
it's true, we haven't talked about him a lot. James Clapper has a couple of quotes about this, and he's not a big figure in the movie, but
okay.
also, I mean, what a get. The fourth
Yeah,
director
right.
of national intelligence. Like,
Yeah,
here's a guy who might know some things.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I love that they didn't waste our time with it. They just real quick, bam, 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 establish
yeah,
everyone's bona fides and move
yeah.
on. That's not the point of the movie, but trust us, these people are serious.
Yeah. So one other question.
Similar. Sorry, go ahead.
Why aren't like Lou Elizondo and Jay Stratton and some of the other folks in that front part?
Because they are arguably the main characters of this documentary, and they
Got
get
it.
introduced in the next segment with a
Ah,
more detailed
okay.
background of like who they are and how they came to
All
this.
right, cool. I'll put on my patient pants.
After that, they then do another rapid fire, or more accurately, they continue the same rapid fire
Hmm.
montage. I've broken it apart here for our podcast, where everyone kind of gives the like one sentence high level takeaway that they all have. Chris Mellon, I've come to the conclusion that we are not only not alone in the universe, but we have been discovered by an intelligence from some other part of the universe. Hal Puthoff, there's evidence we are not alone. Eric Davis, humanity is not the only intelligent species in the universe. Ryan Graves, we are not alone in the universe. Tim Gallaudet, humanity is not the only intelligence in the universe. Jim Semivan, UAP are real, they're here, and they're not human. Hal Puthoff, there are other intelligences that have highly advanced exotic craft interacting with the human population. Chris Mellon, they're here. This is real. It's happening now. Carl Nell, non human intelligence exists. It's been interacting with humanity, and it's been doing so on this planet for a long time. Gary Nolan, we are not the only intelligent life form in the universe. There's something here on the planet with us that is intelligent and more intelligent with us. Chris Mellon, this is the biggest discovery in human history.
None of those are surprising to me except for Gary Nolan. And the that's the first time I've heard someone say that it's more intelligent than us. Um, I don't know. I kind of had a
Yeah,
feeling when I
they've
heard
all
that.
said these things before, but yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. Gary Nolan usually treads very cautiously around making
yeah,
definitive statements, so it is kind of funny to hear him just like lay it out like that.
yeah.
But
Right.
it's also been quite clear for a while that that is what Gary Nolan believes.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so yeah, phenomenal opening, like right out the gate. Here's what you're gonna get in this
Hmm.
movie. Very well done.
Yeah.
Um, from there, and I'm going to rely a lot less on quotes while I discuss the movie
Okay.
for this part. Um, the main through line of this movie is following the trajectory of Lou Elizondo, Jay Stratton, and to a lesser degree, Chris Mellon,
Mm.
as they discuss their careers. Jay Stratton talks about his background working in the DIA. Lou Elizondo, similarly working in the military and eventually running classified programs. They talk about hearing UAP reports, and they don't say it, but from what we know, the implication is that one of the first ones was the Tic Tac. the
Mhm.
2004 incident on the Nimitz, which had a very credible set of eyewitnesses collected on multiple sensor platforms. Like it was a
Right.
very well documented sighting. Um, and long story short, that started them on a trajectory to begin a program that eventually became ATIP.
Mm.
One of the criticisms I have seen of the movie is that they don't talk about OSAP at all.
Yeah.
For anybody who's somehow just tuning in now, this has been a point of confusion
Yeah.
since 2017 when the
Yeah.
New York Times article first came out and identified Lou Elizondo as the head of ATIP, but then everything in the article was actually about the however many millions of dollars that Harry Reid had acquired for a different program called OSAP that was run by Jay Stratton. These are muddy programs.
Yeah.
OSAP did transition to become ATIP. Depending on your point of view, that is a more or less official program that was more or less run by Lou Elizondo, or may have just been Lou Elizondo in a closet with Al Puthoff. But the point is, they kind of hand wave away the complicated history of OSAP and ATIP. They just say the word ATIP
Mm.
and they talk. One of the things I appreciated is out the gate, they talk about both Lou and Stratton running ATIP,
Mm.
which is my understanding of it. It was originally
Okay.
Stratton's program. He brought Elizondo in. Eventually, when they ran into troubles, it went under Elizondo's umbrella. In Lou's book, we found out that when Lou left the government, that was after a big conversation with Jay Stratton where they agreed Jay was going to stay in government and work on things from the inside, while Lou was going to leave government and work on things from the outside. And between the two of them, they would be able to kind of tag team and make this happen. The movie definitely follows that trajectory. That's what they
Okay.
really care about. Um,
What
the
do
main thing, sorry, go
so
ahead.
does ATIP and OSAP, do those count as the legacy UAP program, or is that pre ATIP?
No. So that's a really good question. And one of the things that you and I have been confused about is people refer to the legacy UAP program,
Hmm.
and it's unclear if that's a title, a genre,
Mm.
an umbrella term for multiple programs. Like
Right.
um, in this documentary, at least, they represent it as a single thing that
Okay.
they uncovered while working at ATIP. They explicitly say we uncovered that while they were starting up a UAP program and
Hmm.
like wow, nobody is paying attention to this, somebody needs to. They come to find out that there is another program.
Yeah.
Stratton says, while we were trying to overcome all of these hurdles, we discovered another deeply hidden and much larger UAP program.
Mm.
Elizondo says this program was so sensitive that it was withheld from the Secretary of Defense, Congress, and even the President of the United States. This program is referred to as the Legacy Program.
Mm.
This program has been capturing, retrieving, and reverse engineering UAPs since at least 1947.
Okay, so it has to be a combination of all of them, like Project Blue
I
Book
think so.
and
Yeah.
all those things. Okay, sure.
Project Blue Book was a different thing, but yeah, they do talk. There's later in the podcast, we'll talk about the new information that did come out in this, and we'll
Yeah.
talk a
Okay.
little bit more about what they reveal about the legacy program. But
Okay.
the short
Seems more.
version is imagine that at the end of World War II, you have the OSI, which is what becomes the CIA, and you have the
Okay.
Army Air Force, which is we didn't have an Air Force because aerial warfare was kind of a new thing. So
Yeah.
after the war, they started the CIA and they started the Air Force. The implication here is that that all happened around the same time as Roswell, maybe the Magenta UFO that the
Mm.
Vatican was involved in transferring to the US after World War II. But basically, 1947 era, we suddenly become aware of and maybe take possession of some UFOs, and it all gets compartmented immediately. And the legacy program is what grew out of that effort, and it has been going wild ever since.
Mm.
So yeah, as covered in Lou Elizondo's book, eventually he's trying to get in front of the Secretary of Defense, and he's running into static the whole time.
Yeah.
Eventually, he talks to Jay Stratton and Chris Mellon, and they realize the only way to change the DoD is via Congress. So Lou quits to work outside while Stratton stays inside, and Stratton goes on to form the UAP task force. Um, Here's something that's really interesting. Lou left the government and worked outside to draw
Hmm.
media attention to the topic and eventually to work with Congress. Um, the media attention they show in the documentary, doc,
Documentary.
document, documentary, thank you. In the doc, in the film, what they show is a lot of news clips of Lou being interviewed.
Yeah.
What they don't show or mention is To the Stars Academy or Tom DeLonge.
Oh, yeah. Those were pretty important, huh?
They were kind of a big deal. That
Yeah.
was how Lou got out in front of the media, was by joining To the Stars, and they
Yeah.
eventually started their TV series, which got a
I,
lot of attention. But all of that was via To the Stars. We've talked
yeah.
about this way back in one of our first episodes. Arguably, the current state of UFOs being part of the public consciousness would not have happened without the lead singer of Blink 182. It is a
Yeah.
wild story. I don't blame them for kind of
No, me either.
glossing over it here.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's
Yeah.
really, really, really weird. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. I wonder how
so
Tom feels about that.
it's very strange. I mean, he's back in Blink 182 now, so
So maybe he
presumably
doesn't
he's
care.
busy, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Lou leaves to do media attention. The good news is it works.
Hmm.
Stratton explicitly mentions that all of the media attention on Lou immediately resulted in the Hill paying attention and
Hmm.
him getting requests for briefings. And that
Oh,
leads to
interesting.
him like setting up like closed door secure meetings with Congress to introduce them to whistleblowers and internal witnesses. And this is something we've been hearing about for years, that like Congress has spoken to more people than we know about publicly. That's because behind the scenes, Stratton and also Elizondo and Mellon are working to bring the most compelling witnesses to them.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Elizondo and Mellon, together with Stratton, work with Congress to set up public hearings. They also start working on whistleblower protections. We
Hmm.
come to find out that's largely because of David Grush. Um,
Sure.
David Grush,
I
ultimately
mean, it's
this
all of them, right?
culminates. It's all of them, but Grush especially
Okay.
was running into a lot of trouble. He had his whistleblower complaint with
Yeah.
the inspector general,
Yeah.
and he was getting a lot of pushback. Um, they also discuss that basically, as they start making progress, they start experiencing pushback from
Hmm.
the legacy program. And this takes multiple forms. There were public attacks on Lou Elizondo. The spokesperson for the Pentagon explicitly came out and lied to the public, said Lou never worked there. And if he did, he certainly didn't run a UFO program. Um, they interfered with the funding for the UAP task force. And notably, Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis talk about they were in contact with scientists involved in the legacy program. So
Yeah.
Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis are the two big senior scientists that were on the UAP task force. They were in OSAP. They've been involved in this from the get-go. And they were explicitly talking to scientists involved in the legacy program, and then the legacy program shut that shit down. Um,
Hmm.
Also, Lou, I believe, mentions at one point that as they start moving forward with legal measures in Congress, such as what became the UAP Disclosure Amendment, the legacy program starts interfering by legally donating money to the election
Wow.
funds of Congress people and then putting pressure on them to vote against these things when the time comes,
Oh,
which is
that's so
legal
interesting.
but shitty.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's wild.
Um,
I hadn't even thought about. Yeah, but of course they're lobbying. That's how you get congressional time,
yeah,
right?
of course. This brings us to the third thing that they don't mention that I found unusual. No mention of Arrow at all.
I mean,
The
yeah,
UAP task force was eventually shut down in favor of the weird acronym I can never remember, which eventually became Arrow. Arrow is now the official Pentagon UFO investigative body, but there's been plenty of evidence over the last year or so that shows that they are, at best, incompetent,
right.
and at worst, actively working to obfuscate and throw mud.
Yeah, right. So that's not surprising
So
either. Like,
it's not surprising given that you're trying to tell a tight story,
yeah.
but it's interesting because they're explicitly talking about the pushback they received, and this I think was one of the largest forms of pushback. They co-opted the mechanism that Jay Stratton had set up with the UAP task force and turned it into just another voice of the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I found it really weird. Um, the very end of the film, it ends oddly in a way that I think makes sense given that the bulk of these interviews were recorded 2 to 4 years ago.
Okay.
So it has been in production for a while. A lot of stuff has
Some stuff
happened.
has happened.
you know,
Yeah.
so at what point do you stop updating the film? So
Yeah.
they end with a brief aside about the threat narrative. And to
Mm,
their credit, they do kind of cover the idea that the reason the military has to talk about it as a threat narrative is that's the only reason the military pays attention to anything. If it's
yeah.
not a threat, it's not really a military issue.
Right.
So if you want the DoD involved, you have to make the case that this is some form of threat, which again is not the
Yeah.
same thing as hostile. Like Lou always goes back to that analogy of if you walk onto the deck of an aircraft carrier, you are absolutely under threat from being very badly hurt
Yeah.
by the backwash of those jet engines. That doesn't mean the jet engines are out to get you.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. But there's a risk.
they also, yeah, they also talk about the the impact of making contact with non-human advanced species, and
Okay.
they kind of linger on this idea that um, Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis do a very condensed segment about how UFOs fly, talking about the whole warp bubble thing.
Mm,
And they kind of hand wave away an explanation that we have seen them do a larger explanation of, but that if it's the first time you're seeing it in the film, might come across as a little bit like just trust us. They talk about
yeah.
how expensive that would be in terms of energy, and therefore the fact that these things are doing this means they must have access to some incredible form of energy. And the
Sure.
implication
Yeah.
is if we can get that form of energy out, that could effectively solve our energy production problems overnight. We're done with oil and gas and coal. Um, for the record, I agree with this, but don't think they did a very good job of making this case. I think they had like 3 minutes of runtime to make this point, and it didn't come across very compelling. But I have
Yeah.
seen people talk about this at more length, and I
Hmm.
do find the idea compelling. It also comes back into the threat narrative and why you might not disclose this stuff publicly, which is, let's say that it's powered by 0 point energy. This is free energy we're drawing from the ether. You just
Hmm.
pull it out of the air. And it's unlimited power. And hey, we're just good. This is better than clean fusion. It's just
Yeah.
there.
It's just always there.
Um, well, any energy that could be pulled out can also be turned into a bomb.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
if you're living in a world where not everyone's on the same page, maybe you don't want the free, unlimited source of energy that could easily be turned into a bomb to be public knowledge. But the counterpoint to that is, and always has been, nuclear power. Everyone knows nuclear power exists. It is
Hmm.
something that scientists are allowed to study. It is something we are allowed to build power plants about. The information is also absolutely controlled. The
Yeah.
research is kept secret, and we don't tell everyone about it.
But
You can
at the same
argue
time,
about how
like,
effective that has
people can
been, but we
figure it
do
out.
have an existing model for this, is my
Yeah,
point.
yeah. Yeah. Did you ever hear the story about the Eagle Scout who built a tiny dirty reactor out of wristwatch radium?
God, no. How did that
Well,
go?
poorly. But he got his
Yeah.
Eagle badge.
Yeah, I bet he did. Did he end up in
Um,
the hospital or prison? Like,
yeah, a little of both from what I understand.
Jesus.
He's, a minor, so he got out
Sure,
pretty
sure.
quick. Um, but
All
yeah, it
right.
was kind of surprising.
Uh, the very last thing in the movie says in 2025, Senators Schumer, Rounds, and Gillibrand once again proposed their bipartisan UAP Disclosure Act with the hope of it finally being signed into law. They had introduced the UAP Disclosure Act earlier in the film. We've talked about a lot here, so I won't recap. Uh, the last line says, their efforts continue to receive pushback. This is a very frustrating title card because it's unclear. Does he mean now?
Right.
Today?
Yeah.
Because I
It's
have
been out for
heard
3 years. Yeah.
basically nothing about the UAPDA being in serious contention for the NDAA this year. Literally this week, someone asked Burleson about it, and he was like, "We've got like a last ditch Hail Mary effort. Maybe we can get in." But like, the vibes have been very clear. Like, this shit ain't gonna happen. So
Yeah.
I I I respect that he was sticking with the narrative that this is pushback from the legacy program,
Mhm.
but this kind of shorthand of it was proposed again, like, I don't think it really serves the audience. That isn't quite what. Anyway,
Yeah. It gives
little
some
bit of an
hope,
awkward
but
dismount.
yeah.
But overall, the film was very good at kind of tracking the trajectory of this story
Yeah.
as it went from why did Lou Elizondo go public? What have he and Chris Mellon been doing in coordination with Jay Stratton to move this topic forward? Why does Congress take this seriously? And it's just chock full of interviews with people in Congress, people in the military, people in the intelligence community talking about their exposure to it, why
Mhm.
they take it seriously, and why things need to happen. So,
Yeah.
to kind of get back to my TLDR at the top, I think it's worth watching. I especially think it's worth showing to anybody that's new. Um, there wasn't a whole lot that was new
Yeah.
for
So
people
I
like
want to
us
ask
who are
about
deep
that.
in the topic.
So
Mhm.
I know there's a little bit that was new. How much of the film do you think was kind of recap compared to new stuff?
That's a rough question.
Okay.
80 to 90%.
Okay. Cool.
Like
So
it was
yeah.
mostly stuff we already know. The
Okay.
new stuff was sprinkled throughout,
Okay.
almost to punctuate a point. They would say something. I'm like, wait, I haven't heard that before. Like, take a quick note.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay. So you
let,
have to
let me
watch the
kind
whole
of
thing.
burst through the new information that I
Okay.
found most compelling. And I'm not going to
Okay.
say this is everything that's new in the film. These are just the ones that stood out to me as I don't think we knew that before.
Hmm.
Um, the main thing is, this is the most clarity I have ever seen around anyone talking about the legacy program. The legacy program has
Okay.
always been very unclear, and I've always taken it as kind of a maybe a code name
Hmm.
representing the undercover efforts and deep secrecy that I assume is multiple programs, none of which are
Yeah.
called the legacy program. That's
Right.
just what we call it as a
Yeah.
shorthand for, we're the new guys, but it turns out there's a program that's been here for 80 years doing it, and they know a lot. Um,
Yeah. So there's no
but
office of the legacy
Elizon,
program.
I don't think so. Yeah. But Lou comes out and he says, here are the main players in the legacy program. And I
Hmm.
like sit straight up like, whoa, all
Yeah.
right, go
That's new.
off, Lou.
Okay. Carry on.
The main players in the legacy program have long been the Central Intelligence Agency,
Okay.
the U.S. Air Force, the
Mhm.
Department of Energy,
Mm,
and major defense contractors.
okay.
The CIA is responsible for the oversight of the overall effort. And then it
Hmm.
cuts to Eric Davis, and he says, even more bluntly, the deputy director of science and technology at the CIA controls the UAP crash retrieval portfolio.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So
Like,
they
that's
just named
actually
a name.
crazy new. Yeah. Have you
Yeah,
Googled them? Who is this?
I haven't. No, I
Okay.
don't know. But they talk about this a little bit. And one of the main things they say is you don't tell the director of the CIA because the director of the
Sure, yeah.
CIA is a political appointee, and like anyone else, they're going to rotate in and out. What you want is the people a level or two under them who are 30-year career employees who stay with this long
Yeah.
term and are going to manage it. So if it sounds a little weird that they're saying the deputy director is doing it, that's why they're saying it. The deputy director is the stable position. Um, but what I will say about this CIA, there have been rumors for years the CIA is heavily involved in the cover up. The Air Force is really interesting. We'll talk about that in a second, because the Air Force has, at best, reluctantly, and at worst, at best, reluctantly cooperated with the UAP task force, and at worst, actively impeded it. For years, we would get the classified reports out every year, which, by the way, we're about due for one. Um,
Ooh.
and it would be like, we got 500 reports from the Navy, and we got 400 reports from the Army, and we got 50 reports from the FAA, and we got 0 reports from the Air Force.
Mm. Yeah.
And one of the guys in the movie makes the point, he's like, it's really weird. It would be like if we heard that there's some new stealth submarine that's everywhere and it's a big threat, and Air Force pilots are reporting it, and the Navy won't talk about it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
shouldn't you
Yeah.
guys be the one that's talking? Yeah.
I mean, on the other hand, like, maybe I mean, the Air Force is more likely to have protocols about it if it's a thing that they're
Yeah.
deeply
Who
concerned
knows?
about. I don't know.
Yeah. So speaking of the Air Force, Elizondo says the CIA is kind of in charge overall. They're like the headquarters. And then he continues, he says the U.S. Air Force is responsible for field operations. These are the folks that are responsible for deploying within a moment's notice anywhere in the world to go secure and retrieve crashed UAPs. Halpudov expands on that. He says, we have intelligence teams quickly notified if there's some UAP event that might involve a crashed vehicle or pieces from a crashed vehicle. They are so well organized that they can basically get to a site, gather material, whatever it is, and once it's in their possession, they have the ability to classify it.
Yeah. Is that highly organized or is that just normal Air Force operations? Like,
As I understand it, it is incredibly highly organized. And this
yeah,
gets into a larger narrative that they touch on in the movie that we have heard from David Grush, more recently from Matthew Brown, and Jake Barber. All three of them have talked about the idea that there's a literal Cold War happening, mostly between the US, Russia, and China,
sure.
over who can get this stuff fastest. And when
Right.
something goes down in the world, like whoever gets to it fastest, like that's fresh material for your research
Mm-hmm.
teams. And they talk about the idea that like in a perfect world, the material goes down uh, in the ocean or in territory we control, or maybe in allied nations. But if it
Yeah.
goes down somewhere
Otherwise,
else, we still go after it.
sure. Yeah. 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 No, I
Right?
guess, I mean, I hope what I was saying didn't sound dismissive. Like, the Air Force is incredibly good at scrambling and dealing with things in minutes. So,
Yeah.
but maybe the like extra bit about it is like they know how to get all the paperwork done to classify something.
Get to that in a moment.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
not that the Air Force classifies it, it's that once it's in our possession, it can be classified by
Mhm. Oh,
the
okay.
Department of Energy. moving on this related point, he says
Hmm.
the defense contractors are responsible for the exploitation and the reverse engineering and analysis of the materials. And Davis says they provide technical and advisory services that the government doesn't have. Now,
Yeah.
overtly, they're talking about the um, exploitation and reverse engineering, but we also know from Jake Barber that defense
Right.
contractors are literally in charge of retrievals at
Yeah.
times.
And storage, right?
Barber's right. Barber's story is that he was trained as part of Air Force Special Ops and was deployed at a moment's notice to do retrieval operations, and that
Hmm.
they had him go out and start a civilian operation so that he could do kind of off the books retrievals that aren't recorded as part of the military stuff. So this whole idea of like the CIA's in charge, the Air Force retrieves the things using their spec ops teams, and then the defense contractors do the reverse engineering, storage, and exploitation.
Hmm.
This aligns really well with everything that we are hearing across the board from multiple first degree witnesses. Um,
Yeah.
I find that very compelling.
Yeah. Me too.
Although I will note, it makes sense that it aligns because all of those witnesses came to us via Elizondo and Stratton and Mellon and all of their
Yeah.
efforts to bring whistleblowers forward. So
Yeah.
it makes
But
sense, but
it
it's
aligns in
not
some.
just Elizondo saying this, right?
Yeah. No, it aligns in some other ways, though. Like, we have strong evidence that the CIA runs other operations like this. Some of
Yeah,
their
absolutely.
takedowns of like dark web things, or the recent breakdown of how they took out this big like private cell phone thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so makes sense to me.
So the last element in the legacy program, Elizondo says, last but not least, is the Department of Energy. Now, this is something I've been looking for an opportunity to talk about on the show
Yeah.
for a couple of years now. There have been some really good articles written about this. We've briefly touched on it in I think it was the historical report, but they talked about the idea that a lot of the stuff that has been improperly classified was happening under the auspices of the Department of Energy. They have,
Right.
well, anyway, to quote Elizondo, they are the world's experts in anything that is related to either atomic or nuclear energy or anything that gives off radiation. But
Right.
there's another advantage because the Department of Energy has its own security classification system outside the overview and oversight of traditional classification systems like the Department of Defense or the intelligence community. And Davis expands on this. He says they've used the security and classification language in the Atomic Energy Act to hide the legacy crash retrieval program. So yeah,
Yeah,
this is
this makes
something we
sense.
have been hearing for a while is UFOs aren't necessarily radioactive, but post World War II, we already had this intense secrecy apparatus
Yeah.
coming out of the Manhattan Project that was
Right.
then codified in the Atomic Energy Act and the creation of the Department of Energy. If you wanted shit kept secret, that was the place to do it. And
Right.
it
At
wasn't
that
a
time. Yeah.
stretch to consider a downed UFO as
Yeah.
possibly radiological.
Yeah.
So
Sure. And
at this point, we're talking aliens. Why would that be under the DOE? But there was a historical reason for it. And I think at
yeah.
this point, it's just that's how it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's also the aspect of we've heard them talking about trying to hide the program in two different places where no
Yeah,
one would have any reason to have need to know of these two separate things. And DOE is
yeah,
perfect for that.
100%. So yeah, I found that really interesting. They
Yeah.
have talked about the legacy program many, many times, but it's always been this
Yeah.
kind of hazy, nebulous thing that's out there. And here's Lou breaking it down, and it wasn't new in the sense that no one has ever mentioned the Department of Energy before, or no one has ever mentioned the CIA. Obviously, we have heard rumors for years the CIA, the Air Force are heavily involved. Defense contractors are used to bring this stuff out of Freedom of Information. The Department of Energy is used to classify it. But to see him just kind of button it all up and put it on screen as like and an organization like flowchart kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
I found that really interesting. And seeing Davis literally name names, like, yeah, the deputy director of science and tech at the CIA, he's in charge of it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Totally.
you're pointing the finger at an individual now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super fun. I
Um,
wonder if I wonder if that person has been getting a lot of emails. I
right? I bet they
I did
have.
some very brief Googling, and it seems like the person who was in charge until very recently, 2022, um,
Hmm.
uh, presumably they've retired, but I don't know if there's a
What was their
new.
name?
What was it? Um, Don Meyerix.
Yeah,
Meyerix.
never heard of him.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway. So that was kind of the biggest like holy shit moment for me. But there were a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of others that were interesting. Do you
Yeah.
remember in an interview not too long ago, Eric Davis just calmly said there are four non-human species that are interacting with the planet. There's the reptilians, the greys, the Nordics. Like it just
Yeah.
kind of like listed it off matter of factly. Everyone's like, holy shit. Um, so they echoed that in this, although confusingly, Davis this time says there are two species I'm aware of.
Ugh. Okay.
Um, First of all, Elizondo says on numerous occasions, these crash retrievals included the bodies of non humans, some sort of intelligent being that is not human. I don't know how you can say that it's intelligent if you just got a body,
You're right. Yeah,
but
exactly.
the implication many times has been it's not just dead bodies they have retrieved.
Mm.
Um, and this is something we have heard claimed repeatedly from multiple sources. Grush was the first one who really kind of mentioned it. He used the kind of like slippery word biologics
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
avoid saying bodies, but he was directly responding to the question, have you recovered pilots with these crafts? And he says, yes, some of the crashes came with biologics. So
Yeah.
he still gave a yes to the question.
Hmm.
Um, and I believe Jake Barber and Matthew Brown also both said that. Um, Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff in Lou Elizondo's book talked about Roswell being a real event with bodies that were retrieved. So this is, for a long time, this was a very nuts and bolts thing. We were talking about craft in the sky. And then we were talking about crash retrievals of craft. And everybody kind of avoided mentioning the fact that there might be beings inside the craft. Lately, it seems they've kind of decided that is the next step that is okay to take. And we're now talking about, yes, obviously, if you recover a crashed UFO, there were people inside it. Were they alive? Were they not? We've heard conflicting reports, but getting back to this idea, at the very least, we have come across bodies as a result of crashes. Hal Puthoff says the intelligence officials that have briefed on these crash retrievals have talked about a number of different species having been observed to be associated with the crash. Bodies recovered are not all of the same type. So
Hmm.
we all immediately think gray aliens because that's what we've all kind of decided is the default alien. But here's Hal Puthoff explicitly saying there's been more than one alien type
Right.
recovered. And Eric Davis says, I'm aware of at least two advanced non human species, one of which has made contact with the legacy crash
Okay.
retrieval program, the other of which the bodies were recovered by the crash retrieval program in various programs.
Hmm.
That is a fascinating little tidbit.
Yeah.
So, two different alien species,
At least.
one of which was bodies in crafts, and the other one of which they're in contact with.
Right.
Does that mean one's working for the other? Does that mean they're working against each other? Are they, do they, and I'm dancing around it because this is something people have been saying for a while, is that they believe that there are multiple non-human intelligences out there and they don't all have the same agenda. So, like we don't want to fall into the George Lucas trap of imagining a binary universe where people are either
Right.
good or evil, light side or dark side. But, at the very least, that implies that some of them may be working to our benefit, some of them may not be.
Yeah.
And if we extrapolate out from human nature, it's easy to imagine that some of them might not care about us at all. Some of them are just here for something else. Some of them are entirely altruistic. Um,
They're only
Obviously, we
here for
don't
the
have
oil.
any more information, but just this one little factoid: two different species. One
Hmm.
was bodies recovered, and the other was contact made. Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is. Yeah.
Now, here's a bit that may not be a surprise to you, being a little more plugged into the world of aviation than I am, but I
Yay.
was startled by it. Jay Stratton is talking about the fact that, these UFOs are everywhere and our military is running into them all the time. And here's why they're flight safety concerns. They're moving through the areas where our, fighter jets are flying and we don't have any way of interacting with them. Stratton says, in addition to national security concerns, this violation of all nations' sovereign airspace presents a safety of flight concern for all military and civilian aviation. And the even scarier thing is that the Federal Aviation Administration stopped using radar to track our air travel. They only track aircraft, predominantly commercial and civilian, that are squawking. So they're actually putting a signal into the system saying, here's where I am. The only way they know UAP are there is if the pilot sees something and says something, which they are heavily stigmatized not to. The fact that the FAA is not tracking UAP is putting American lives at risk every day.
I'm, I guess I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand,
Yeah,
Jay
is
Stratton
that
knows a lot,
surprising?
but
Yeah,
on the other hand, the things that I've read, so they're talking about ADSB,
yeah.
the broadcast system. Um, and from everything I've read, they are still using radar, but the problem with radar is you can't tell what it is, or you can
Mm.
only see that there's something out there. But uh, to to imply that there's no radar happening, um, kind of ignores the military apparatus, like NORAD, which is
He's
definitely
specifically talking
tracking.
about the FAA. Yeah.
Sure. Um, so, like, I guess I get that. I get the concern, but the FAA is not in charge of this risk. They are in charge of mid-air collisions, though. So I don't
I
know.
mean, they're in charge of the civilian side of it.
Yeah.
It gets. I get your larger point, right? That saying the FAA isn't tracking radar doesn't mean there's no radar. It
Yeah.
just means the FAA isn't using it.
And
But
I think they do
if there's a
still also,
okay,
but
so
maybe
I
not as
don't
much.
know, right? This
Yeah.
was one quote in the middle of the movie. I'm
Yeah.
inclined to believe Stratton knows what he's talking
Yeah.
about and that there's probably some nuance here that gets back to
Probably.
kind of what you were talking about, but
Yeah.
it's possible that he's just misinformed. I don't know.
Yeah, me either.
But it was very surprising to me to hear the idea that they're not using it. Part
Yeah.
of the reason I find it believable is after the three weird drone shoot downs and the Chinese balloon that floated over,
Hmm.
one
Yeah.
of the things we found out is that NORAD, at least, had tuned their radar computers
Yeah.
to discard what they considered to be noise in the system.
Yep.
Things that didn't look like planes, missiles, and ICBMs, which are
Right.
what they really care about. So
Yeah.
if it accidentally picks up a bird or a kid's balloon sometimes, that's literally noise that they didn't want.
Hmm.
But in this case, it meant there was an open door in the security of the building that a Chinese balloon could float through.
Right.
So at the very least, there was kind of a discussion at the time of like, why are we ignoring any data from the radar system? And there were good
Mm.
reasons for it, but there's problems with that because it means
Yeah.
anything that doesn't look like what you've trained the radar computer to think is a valid target can go undetected. Well, that
Yeah.
includes things like UFOs that move much faster or much slower than we've calibrated our system
Or
to
without a
detect.
heat source, or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
because of that, that we already know for a fact that even when we are using radar, we're filtering out results that don't look like what we expect. I don't find it that surprising, the idea that the FAA might have like gotten rid of noisy radar in favor of the system that all the planes have to tell you where they are. But there's a pretty obvious weakness to that, which is, like, what if there's a plane up there that isn't squawking?
Sure.
So
Which does happen. Yeah.
obviously, yeah, that does happen, and I assume military radars would pick up on it. But anyway, I found it very surprising. I would love to hear some follow up about it.
Hmm.
If you're listening and you're like, I work at the FAA and this is total nonsense, please comment, let us
Let us
know.
know.
We'll
Yeah,
follow
that'd be
up.
awesome.
But yeah, it was a wild factoid to have just kind of like tossed out in the middle of the film. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
um, One of the other things they did at one point, they were talking about the five observables, which was great. They had this wonderful segment where Lou's in front of a chalkboard and he has the five observables written up and he underlines each of them and explains what they're
Oh,
about.
cute.
But he had the sixth observable there, which was biological effects.
Yeah.
So the five observables are things we see in the UAPs themselves that marks them as anomalous. If a single sighting has one observable, maybe it's interesting. If something has multiple observables, it's very unlikely to be a normal human target, and it's something that's worth paying attention to. But in the course of investigating it, they discovered that people who had exposure to UAP, and they've been very cagey about what this means. Is this just a pilot that flew past one? Is this a soldier who was ordered to approach one on the ground? Is this people who handled crash retrievals? Like, they've never explained how these
Yeah.
people were exposed. But they apparently had a group of people that were exposed, and they had some sort of ill effect on them. And this is, as Gary Nolan mentioned in the very beginning, how he got involved in this in the first place. Now, he's talked about this a lot over the years. There's all sorts of information. It kind of overlaps with Havana syndrome. He's talked about the caudate ptomaine. I don't 100% understand this. It's worth digging into if you're interested. But the short version is there is a measurable health impact on people who have exposures to UAP.
Okay.
So at this point, they cut to Gary Nolan, and he says two individuals who represented themselves as being with the CIA and an aerospace company came to me and asked for my help. They had data of military personnel, intelligence officials, and others associated with the Department of Defense who had direct interactions with UAP, and because of that interaction, suffered some kind of medical harm. These people had scarring inside their bodies and inside their brains. And if you think about it, if you get too close to the back end of a jet engine or too close to the transformer system that's powering your neighborhood, there's energy coming out of those things. Those are just human tech. Now imagine you've got something which is much more advanced technology, which is generating some kind of field that allows these objects to move. You can imagine that if you get too close to it, you're going to get harmed.
Is it more advanced or is it just different? But
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
it's true. So
I
the thing
mean,
I don't get
I would
from
argue something generating a warp bubble is more advanced. But yes,
maybe
we don't
and,
know what it is.
unless yeah, unless negative energy is super easy to get there. But the thing that I don't understand is why they were asking Gary Nolan for help. Um,
I can answer that. So he has
okay.
talked about this in interviews. The short version is Gary had already shown a willingness to engage in kind of stigmatized topics.
Right. Yeah.
The I forgot the name of it. The weird mummy thing that he
Yeah.
investigated. But anyway,
I don't-
he had debunked that. So he has been involved in kind of the fringe science for a while, but taking a very holistic, realistic approach to it. He's not a sucker. He says when things are real, and he has a very science driven methodology. And on top of that, he's just very well regarded
yeah.
in the medical field. So I think they asked around who
Okay.
would be willing to help us with this topic,
Got it.
and
Okay.
a bunch of people pointed them at Gary Nolan. So
It was
they show
Atacama.
up, they talk to Gary Nolan. Yeah, Atacama, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Now,
Makes sense.
here's where it gets interesting because we already knew everything that Gary Nolan just said
Yeah.
from other interviews with him. Cuts to a new guy, Mike Flaherty. He says, I spent 10 years as an intelligence officer for the Navy, and before that, 6 years as Air Force intelligence, and I spent some time on the UAP task force.
Oh.
I am one of the intelligence officials that has experienced biological effects of encountering UAP. Since my first encounter, I've observed other craft, orbs, we'll call it exotic energy fields. Unfortunately, those of us who have investigated it, we tend to become part of the investigation or investigated by our colleagues. That population had about a 25% mortality rate within 7 years of having an interaction.
Oh.
Probably important that the public understands that this is more than just an aerial phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Whoa!
It'd be nice to know how far that field.
25%
Yeah.
mortality?
Right. And how far does that field extend? Like, I would imagine it
Yeah.
was similar in the first days of like nuclear research. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, we didn't get any details about it. Forgive me speaking bluntly. There were no obvious signs of what health effects he had suffered. He wasn't like covered in burns or
Sure.
disfigured or anything. He was just sitting there talking to us.
Yeah.
But Gary Nolan has talked about um, autoimmune effects in the past as mostly brain effects and things like that, and your body then kind of starts behaving differently and a lot of inflammation and things like that.
Sure.
So I don't know what ill effects he suffered, but really interesting to have someone come out and put their name on it and say, yeah, I'm one of those people. And
Yeah, that is.
that statistic, 25% mortality rate, if that is in any way true, you can understand why someone was looking for someone like Gary Nolan to dig into this. Like, yo, we need some help.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. And now we can like look him up and find him on
Yeah.
LinkedIn.
All right. So last up, I've got a few anecdotes for us that are really interesting, but are just like somebody telling a story. And if it's true, holy shit. But like reserve your judgment. First of all, Jay Stratton talking about like when people are starting to come to him and ask for briefings. Uh, this would have been during President Trump's first presidency. He said everyone in authority was paying attention to this topic. One very distinctive moment for me was briefing then Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin. I got through my briefing, and at the end of the brief, he sat back in his chair and he said, You know, Jay, you may wonder why I asked for this briefing. And he said, What are the economic impacts of the president going to the microphone and telling the world we're not alone? I have to think about those kind of impacts in order to prepare if the president were to make that move.
Sure. Yeah. Is that a question for Jay or is that a
I think
rhetorical?
it's sort of explaining, it's a rhetorical
Okay.
thing. But
Yeah.
here's the thing
Is-
that statement on its surface makes perfect sense. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course it's part of his job to think about this.
Yeah.
On the other hand, that means people in high levels in the White House
Yeah.
were taking the topic of
Yeah.
UFOs and alien contact seriously enough to start
Yeah.
preparing for it as part of their day job. I'm not
Right.
surprised that Steve Mnuchin was researching the economic impacts of what if President Trump says something. Jesus Christ, what a nightmare job.
Right.
But specifically that he took the idea that President Trump might go to the microphone and say UFOs are real seriously enough to call for a briefing to consider the economic impacts.
Hmm.
That's wild if it's true.
Yeah, that is you're right. It is pretty impressive that they're taking it seriously and that they aren't being laughed out of the room, which I think is the
Right.
previous 40 years.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like
Yeah.
it, before 2017, I imagine if you had gone to the Secretary of the Treasury and said, "Hey, should we have a plan for if the president says aliens are real?" Like, get the fuck out of my office, man.
Right. Yeah.
Who hired you?
Yeah.
Yeah. The next anecdote that's really interesting is Eric Davis. As a reminder, Eric Davis, very senior scientist. He was involved in OSAP, ATIP, UAP Task Force, a bunch of others. He is also the guy who uh, we're 99% sure wrote the Eric Davis memo, which details a conversation between him and the General Wilson, Admiral Wilson, detailing his attempts to get read into the legacy program and being denied, even though he was the top of the food chain as far as it came to, these kind of top secret programs. Davis says, I had a few private conversations with former President George H.W. Bush in 2003, in which he told me that when he became the CIA director in the Ford administration, he was not briefed on the legacy UAP crash retrieval program. So, getting back to what we said, the director of the CIA is not considered
Yeah.
somebody that has a need to know. But he later found out about it, and he informed me that there were a number of crash retrievals that had taken place since the mid 40s. And he also informed me of a UAP event that took place at Holloman Air Force Base in 1964, where three UAP approached the base. One of them landed on the tarmac, and a non human entity deboarded the craft that landed and interacted with uniformed Air Force and civilian CIA personnel. And when he asked for more details, he was told he did not have a need to know. Now, the story of the Holloman Air Force Base is one of those ones that's been floating around for a while.
Sure.
By some accounts, President Eisenhower was there and
Mm,
met with the aliens.
okay.
Um, I believe it's Eisenhower. I may be getting a couple threads mixed up. Forgive me. But Holloman is not a new story. But getting Eric Davis to say, I heard about this directly from President Bush is
Yeah.
interesting. Also, he learned about this later, was told what we just heard that a UFO landed at Holloman and an alien came out and talked to CIA personnel, but you don't have a need to know to learn more details. What is the circumstance in which you need to know that much, but
Right.
not
But not
anymore?
more. Yeah. 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 That is really interesting. Um, yeah, I don't know how you parse that.
Right?
I
Very weird.
also I always forget that Bush Senior was a CIA director. Just like
Oh, yeah.
every time we talk about that, it floors me because
Super weird.
Bush Jr. Would not have managed that very well.
No.
Anyways,
um, okay. So, speaking of anecdotes, this is maybe the wildest one that comes up. They're talking about whistleblowers, and in
hmm
particular, the need to protect whistleblowers. And they cut to Elizondo, and he says, I received a call from a friend, one of the staffers on the Hill, and he was very shaken up. And he said, listen, we had a very interesting meeting on the Hill. An extremely, extremely senior person in the US government, in the intelligence community, told Congress, for the record, that there was a committee of 27 individuals, and I'm not going to go into code names here, that were mulling over the idea of using extreme measures to silence David Grush and myself, to kill us. Now, people say, oh, come on, that's conspiracy. No, it's not. We've done it before. Under certain circumstances, we have killed Americans without due process. If they are a clear and present national security threat, we can kill Americans. That's not done often, but we can. Without a fair trial, they just poof, disappear, right? So here I am. If I wind up a month from now floating in the Potomac somewhere, you know what happened.
yeah, yeah. I mean, especially in military, they have a totally different structure. Um, but yeah, I mean, uh, we also deport them to prison colonies and all sorts of
Yeah,
stuff we do. But the thing that strikes me is like that's a very large committee. Um, like the Gang of Eight, uh, eight is like a good high number. 27, you're never gonna get
yeah.
27 people to agree.
Yeah. So before we move on with the rest of this story, there's a couple of things here that I find really interesting. One,
Yeah,
um, the size of the committee is really interesting. And Lou specifically says we're not going to talk about code names.
sure.
The only code name that anyone would associate with a number like that is there's a long-standing legend in the UFO community about Majestic 12, which was
Sure.
theoretically post World War II, a committee of 12 high ranking scientists and intelligence community people who were put in charge of the overall secrecy of the UFO topic. They were the top of the food chain, not the president, not the director of the CIA. MJ12 was in charge. Now,
Hmm.
this is a very controversial topic because the source for MJ12 is a loose collection of photocopied documents that were handed to journalists and are quite likely to have been authored by Richard Doty, who was employed as a disinformation agent in the Air Force to throw people off the trail of UFOs. Um, so you don't have to take MJ12 seriously at all, but a committee of 27, and we're not going to talk code names, anybody's going to immediately go, okay, this must be what MJ12 turned into. Now it's MJ27 or whatever.
Maybe.
And Lou kind of hints at that later, but it's a little weak. The thing I find more interesting is let's put a pin in that whole idea. Let's just take for a given there's a committee of 27 people for whatever reason who would be in a position to discuss should we kill Elizondo and Grush to stop them from talking?
Right.
Why would that be reported to Congress in a skiff?
Right. Why? They're perfectly
I
happy
don't
to
know
not
the answer to
report all
that.
these other things.
Yeah.
Why would they
So
report
when I
that?
yeah, so when I heard that in the movie, first of all, Lou has a flair for the dramatic. So I love that he
Sure.
tells this story. He's like, now you're going to say it's a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. If I wind up dead, you know what happened.
Yeah.
Fine. But we know that threats have been made
Yeah.
on many of the whistleblowers, including David Grush. So the overall idea that a whistleblower would be threatened,
Sure.
presumably by the powers that be, by the legacy program, is not outrageous. It's just the way that Lou presents this raises a couple of red flags. In an interview after the movie came out, Lou was being interviewed by Matt Ford of The Good Trouble Show. And Matt says, in the movie, you discussed a plan that was under consideration by 27 people to have both you and David Grush taken out. I was aware of this when this was occurring, and I can tell you, meaning the audience, separate of anything that Lou has to say about this, that this is accurate. This is not an exaggeration. This is not fiction. This is absolute fact. And I think it goes to illustrate the danger that people like Lou Elizondo and David Grush put themselves in when they come forward like this.
Oh yeah.
So that's really interesting. Matt Ford coming
Yeah.
right out and collaborating it. Um,
Right.
yeah. Um,
Yeah. It's super scary,
Elizondo,
and
sorry, go ahead.
I think it's super scary, and I think they're tremendously brave to do it. Um,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine being in that place, but I would like to believe I would
Yeah,
do the same.
100%.
But
Well, and also, let's be clear. You're not just in danger from Men in Black or the Legacy program or
yeah,
sanctioned kill operations or whatever. If you are a known whistleblower, there are wackadoo patriots in this country who might
sure.
decide that, like, well, if the government won't shut him up, I will. Like,
Right.
yeah, it's not a healthy move to make. Um,
Right.
So Elizondo takes this prompt and he goes on to explain a little bit more, thankfully, about how he heard about this. And here is where I start to find the story a little more compelling. Elizondo says, I received 3 calls from separate people that were in that meeting. Pause for just a moment.
Yeah.
This meeting was in a skiff. It is a classified briefing of staffers and Congress members by some very high member of the intelligence community. You don't call people to talk to them about stuff that happened in a skiff.
Right.
That's not a thing.
Yeah.
3 separate people calling him to tell him what they heard in this meeting tells you something about how unsettled those people were. Now,
Right.
to continue with that theme, Lou says one of them was completely smash drunk. I guess whatever they heard bothered them so much that they went to the local watering hole around the corner there in DC, started drinking, and that person gave me a call. Another one called me and I could hear them sniffling. I assumed they had a bad cold, but it turns out they were so upset by the conversation that they were crying and they were saying, I can't believe I just heard that here. And Matt Ford chimes in. He says, yeah, I had a conversation with an individual that was part of this classified briefing regarding this issue. And following the briefing, this individual went to the restroom and proceeded to throw up. They were so unbelievably upset about this.
I mean,
So,
I believe it would happen, and
absolutely.
I believe those are totally valid reactions that would happen. But uh, yeah, I don't know. It's weird that they would talk about it
It's
unless the
weird they would
point
talk
is
about
to
it.
scare Congress.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that because I still come back to the idea. I find it very believable that
Yeah,
there's a group that decides they should take measures into their own hands and considered this. I find it very confusing that they would then report this consideration to Congress in a skiff.
right.
Why would they do that? But that's an interesting idea if they're trying to show Congress, hey, I know you all are starting to dig into this. You should know.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Um,
So, anyway, take that story with as many grains of salt as you want. I'm not here trying to tell you it happened. Lou is a little bit of a divisive figure in the community. He does have a flair for the dramatic, but this is far from the only time we have heard about
mhm,
explicit threats to whistleblower lives and
yep.
livelihood. Um, I find it compelling, albeit with some pretty major questions I would love to have answered about why anyone is talking about this in the first place. But
Right.
yeah, very, very upsetting if it's true.
Yeah.
Oh boy, dead air. Oh no.
It's okay.
Chuck paused right as I went to take a drink. Sorry.
Yeah,
my
sorry, I
my
was thinking. Your
when
dead
I
air reaction is very funny to me, because I,
it's because I
s-
worked in radio.
yeah, I know.
Like
But
in
our,
radio, dead air is the worst thing that could happen. If
yeah,
more than like a couple of seconds go by, like literally like my heart rate goes up. I'm like, oh no. Like why isn't anyone talking?
yeah. I mean, worst case, we could just tell our software to remove that bit. It's
Yeah, but we're not gonna, let's be honest. Everybody's gonna be hearing us talking about this right now. Anyway,
yeah,
uh let's get to the last part of it. So the
okay.
movie comes out, and people are talking about it and they're having different reactions. Some people are disappointed, some people are thrilled. Overall, the vibe seems to be very good.
Hmm,
Maybe not earth shattering, as some people were hoping. Maybe not the president is definitely going to disclose because of this movie, but
right.
like a very good. Here's the current state of the UFO thing and why you should maybe take it seriously.
Hmm,
Like, in that regard, I think it's a huge success. The community reaction has been largely focused on the fact that the film includes a very brief interview with Marco Rubio.
hmm,
And I mean like a minute or two of footage.
yeah.
He is one of many people that they talked to. Um, Marco Rubio in the film says there have been, quote, repeated instances of something operating in the airspace over restricted nuclear facilities. It's not ours, and we don't know whose it is. Now,
Hmm,
the blowback that came from this is because the film identifies him by his current job title, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The interview was done a few years ago when he was a senator. At the time, he had given many other interviews explaining why he found UFO whistleblowers compelling, and he had a line along the lines of, we have people with very high jobs in the US government that are either liars, crazy, or telling the truth, and two of those three options are not good. I don't know what the answer is. I've
Yeah,
shared
it's a
that quote
great
on this
line.
show before. I find it
Yeah,
a very good, why do you take military whistleblowers seriously? Because whether they're telling the truth or not, the fact that a military whistleblower believes this is worth paying attention to,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
either it's real or it's not. And if it's not real, that's also a problem.
Yeah,
So
right.
anyway,
Yeah.
Rubio's been out there for a while. We kind of knew he was into this. Apparently, he
Yeah.
gave this interview at the time.
But why
So, of
would people
course,
care that it's just the wrong title? Like, is that the worst part about this thing?
the implication being that they're using the fact that he is Secretary of State to lend more weight to his remarks.
I mean,
Like, oh,
yeah,
we got the
sure.
Secretary of State on camera saying UFOs are real. Well, no, actually, you have a senator on film saying that. Yeah, it shouldn't be a huge difference, but it is because the Secretary of State saying something, it borders on an official statement from the White
Right.
House. It's
Sure.
not. It's technically the same as a senator saying it, but you understand why people were taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Rubio also is a politician, right? And everybody knows he has presidential ambitions. So
Hmm.
Fox News interviewed him and they gave him the opportunity to distance himself from the film. He did not throw the film under the bus. I have seen headlines saying Rubio disavows his statements. I've seen headlines saying Rubio stands by his statements. What he said explicitly is, I'm not disavowing that.
Okay.
I was describing what people had said to me, not things I had firsthand knowledge of. There have been things that fly over the airspace, restricted airspace, be it where we're conducting military exercises or the like, and everyone in the government says they're not ours. So, what I worry most about, just me personally, is that some adversary, another country for example, has developed some asymmetric capability for surveillance or the like that we're just not prepared for. This is a masterclass statement.
Yeah.
He neatly ties it into the current
Yeah.
drone phenomenon that
Yeah.
everyone seems to believe is Russia or China developing advanced drones. Nobody's really arguing anymore that these drones that are shutting down airports everywhere are alien. So he's able to kind of distance himself. If
Sure.
all you want to hear is this politician isn't crazy, he says, here's why I'm concerned about it. It's always
Mm-hmm.
weird when you have something flying through the airspace and we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we pay attention? That's a very reasonable statement. He doesn't say anything about aliens. He doesn't say
Yeah.
anything about non humans. But he
Which is
also explicitly says, I am not disavowing that. So anybody who's like, oh, Marco Rubio, like, backed out of it, like, they don't know what they're talking about. He's very clear that he still believes what he says. And
yeah.
even in the film, he was very careful to not say it's aliens. He says it's
Yeah.
not ours and we don't know whose it is.
Yeah.
And all of his quotes the whole time have been, yes, some people are saying it's aliens and we should look into it because if they're not crazy, it's worth paying attention to. And if they are crazy, it's worth paying attention to them. So
Yeah.
I don't feel like any of the things that have happened with Marco Rubio have deserved any of the attention they've gotten. It's just that he's Secretary of State, so his comments carry a little more weight than they
Sure.
did when he was a senator.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I wouldn't have even mentioned this,
Mm-hmm.
except in the wake of everyone talking about Marco Rubio, a couple of days ago, journalist Michael Schellenberger quoted in a larger article about Marco Rubio, he quoted one of Rubio's senior advisors saying, "We are headed towards massive disclosure."
Interesting. I mean,
And
everyone seems to be
I've
saying
got
that.
a pile of I've got a pile of links right now
Yeah.
about rumors that the Trump administration is getting ready for disclosure. I couldn't find anything that made me think they were compelling enough to include here, but there is
Okay.
undeniably a buzz in the air in the wake of this movie
Interesting.
that Congress is taking it seriously, that maybe the president is taking it seriously. We've got Schellenberger, who takes the topic pretty seriously and has
Yeah.
broken big stories in the past, including Immaculate Constellation,
Mm-hmm.
quoting someone saying we're heading towards massive disclosure. If I let myself get all excited every time somebody said we're heading towards disclosure, I would be having a heart attack every week.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
learned to take these things with a grain of salt, but I am hearing it. I don't want to
Yeah.
pretend like I'm not. So this is one of those things. Chuck and I were talking about the podcast schedule recently. We have one more podcast slot left in the
Mm-hmm.
year. In a couple of weeks, in theory, we're going to sit down and record another podcast. It's possible that I will end up calling that one because I'm heading into Christmas break time and I've got lots
Hmm.
of other things to do and nothing really has happened that's like, oh yeah, we got to talk about this. Or it's possible that 2 weeks from now we'll be like, well, I guess we're talking about the fact that Trump just said UFOs are real. So
Yeah. And
who
let's be honest,
knows?
they would do it on Take Out the Trash Day, right? Um,
Yeah,
if they're
yeah, yeah,
gonna
it's
do it,
true.
it's gonna be New Year, like Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve or something.
So you make an interesting point, and this is the other thing I've seen a lot of people talking about, which is it has been widely agreed that if any president was going to go rogue and do disclosure, it's Trump. Like if there's
Oh yeah,
anybody who's like, yeah, I want my name associated with that, it's Trump.
yeah,
But also, is there any president who you'd be more inclined to think this is bullshit
yeah, yeah.
than Trump? Like, what is
Nope.
he trying to get me to not think about if he's up on stage telling me that UFOs are real?
What's he really doing? Yeah,
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 right? So
yeah.
I have mixed feelings
Interesting.
about the
Yeah,
fact that the Trump administration is theoretically considering disclosure.
yeah. Right. Yeah,
I don't. I want it. You guys come out and say it. I'll deal with the messy. Like, tell me.
yeah. I mean, it would crack something open, right? Um, who knows who would respond?
Oh man. So anyway, it was a good documentary. I enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
I think if you have any tolerant friends in your life who are tired of listening to you talk about it and have shown a willingness to maybe be open to learning a little
Yeah.
more, sit them down and watch it with them.
Did
Set up a viewing party. It's a good time.
did Annie watch it?
No,
No. Okay.
no. Annie listens to this podcast. I don't know
Oh,
if
okay.
I've mentioned that before because I still end the show every week by saying thanks for
That's
talking to
so
me, so
funny.
Annie doesn't have to, which is hilarious because then she just listens to me talking to you about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And talks to you
But
beforehand too. So,
a little bit, a little
yeah.
bit. Mostly like she gets a sentence or two where I don't
Okay.
feel the need to go into details because I know she'll listen to the podcast. But yeah,
Listen to the podcast.
it's super
That's so
funny.
funny.
No, she does not have any interest in watching this documentary. I cannot imagine.
Okay.
You're my
Cool.
tolerant friend. There's a reason I started
Yeah.
the podcast with you, Chuck.
And and not Annie or your kiddo or yeah. Yep. Makes
That's
sense.
right. Yeah. All right,
Cool.
everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our Discord and social media accounts.
And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime or grab some t-shirts at veryexcitingtime.com/merch.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to, except she definitely will.
Yeah, totally.